Welcome back, everyone, to Random's Thoughts. We're jumping into another build that actually carried me once again to another diamond rank, and that is what you see on screen. Kind of inappropriately named leveling. Honestly, I went into this just simply because I wanted to level Crowe. I spent we'll say an inordinate amount of time with Crowe when I was playing through the Fearless Raw campaign. You can check that out also on this YouTube page. But for this particular deck list, I decided to try and, build a more normal deck list. Now, there are some restrictions for this simply because I don't have that large of a collection. There are definite upgrades that can be made to this, but even despite missing those other beneficial cards, you can definitely make it to diamond rank and beat some of the top decks in the current meta. So let's jump into the list itself. As we're looking at the deck list, let's talk about Crowe himself. I did joke on stream that I kind of hope that there is a skin at some point, because I'm very curious as to whether Crowe is the Crow in the picture and the human is the familiar, or vice versa. Which one is the actual champion here? Because to me, I kind of hope it's the bird. But digressions aside, as you can see, I don't actually have Cover of Night unlocked. Your minions gain dangerous until the end of your turn. Is this useful, or would it have been useful? I'm sure there were some games where I did end up banking a lot of blood, but more often than not, I was expending it for Deadly Snipe. Now, what does that do? Target enemy minion loses 5 health. As you'd imagine, this allows you to pick off and snipe opposing minions, which is very important because overall, this deck is a mid-rangey tempo build that has a lot of card advantage elements. Now, that's a lot of, buzzwords that I threw out there, but essentially, you want to play threats and pressure your opponent and then continue pressuring your opponent because there are a number of cards, and we'll get to them as we go through the individual cards, that allow you to generate more cards, either by literally drawing from your deck or by conjuring things or other effects. As a result, you end up with a fair amount of gas in the tank, despite the fact that you may be just flinging things onto the board and at your opponent's face. In that vein, Deadly Snipe helps you keep tempo because you could play a threat and still remove theirs, or ensure that your existing threat on board stays because you snipe it into range for combat to get there. You can set your opponent up for a number of awkward scenarios where they just don't have a choice. They have to walk into the Deadly Snipe because otherwise they're just not playing anything. Now, the second ability, which we do have unlocked, is Scavenge. Target an enemy minion. When it is killed, restore health equal to its attack. This can certainly be relevant in a few different matchups. Sometimes you just need that extra turn and they played something big and you're able to finish it off through a number of different means. And if you scavenge it, it buys you one more turn. Realistically, you're hoarding all of your blood as a resource for Deadly Snipe, but you don't want to ignore Scavenge. And then obviously, if you had Cover of Night, like we mentioned earlier, there would be scenarios where you'd occasionally want to use it. Now, let's talk about the actual cards. Taking a peek at the actual cards, I will say that you're going to see a number of epics in here and a couple of legendaries. They don't necessarily need to be there. However, as mentioned earlier, this is still somewhat of a budget version. It can definitely be improved, but you can definitely succeed, especially at the lower ranks, where you don't need some of these cards. However, some of them are unlocked either by defeating the campaign or through other means, and you should be able to accrue them, and a lot of them are useful outside of this build. So let's jump into the individual items themselves. The first one up is Owl Familiar, and this is one of those cards that I just mentioned. Specifically one of those cards that you'll find use for it elsewhere. I can't say enough positive things about Owl Familiar, and I mentioned this on stream, but to me, it's stunning that this is a recover that draws you a rune. It immediately replaces itself. Now, sure, there's going to be a scenario where you play it and then you do something else to draw a bunch of cards, maybe not in this deck, but in others, and then you somehow end up with 8 cards in hand, you can't get that extra card. But realistically, you're playing it, it's immediately getting value, and your opponent needs to immediately remove it, either by expending a card, a blitz minion, a blood ability, something, or they risk just handing you continual card advantage. Now, you do want to be careful if you have multiple Owl Familiars or other effects that you're not just filling up your hand. You can never play anything. Believe it or not, that happens. You can have too much of a good thing, I guess. Space it out a little bit. But Owl Familiar is a great early play. As long as you think you can get 2 draws out of it, it's probably worth it, because most likely your opponent's going to have to expend some resource to remove it. Whereas comparatively, if you played the 2-mana draw spell from Myth, okay, you're +1 card. Here, you're +1 card, but you might have gotten in a damage and force your opponent to commit something to the board in a way that they didn't want to, or expend blood that they didn't want to. All around, super hyped about Owl Familiar. Next up is Swamp Scout, which helps keep the curve low and allows you to set up some conjure scenarios. Now, the Warcry is Conjure a Beast. The original intent for this deck was more thematic. I wanted a beast deck, but I just don't have some of the high-end beasts or some of the higher rarity beasts, such as, well, Iron Bull, and a number of others. But Swamp Scout does give you access to that and much more, because you can, of course, hit Tauric Warlords or other powerful beasts that are situationally relevant, whether they are inherently just in a vacuum powerful, or they happen to be narrow for the situation, or you just need to fill a gap in the curve, whatever it happens to be. But Swamp Scout is a great early play that even is relevant late, because it's pay to draw a card, essentially, but you get to choose. Conjure is very, very powerful, and I can't understate that. Next up is Bloodscent Wolf. I've mentioned this in many videos and many streams. I love this card, especially here with Crowe. Your A1 ability, Deadly Snipe, costs 4 blood, which is a lot. It's a fair amount. So seeing Bloodscent Wolf is pretty important, because it allows you to get back in and snipe something without having to wait 1,000 turns, or, 4, for it to all build up back again. So it allows you to then set up all of those tempo scenarios that I was mentioning earlier, where you're continuing to put on pressure, continue to present threats, but simultaneously removing your opponent's blockers, removing their threats, just threatening them in general, that if they play something, it's not long for this world. Plus, there are a number of higher-end minions that just happen to be outside of Deadly Snipe ranges, happen to be outside of Nightmare range, happen to be outside of Desert Twister range, but the combination thereof pretty much eliminates just about anything. So, Bloodscent Wolf, thumbs up. From there, you're going to see an old standby, which is Mastodon. We'll repeat this when we get to Sickle Stalker. Basically, it's Blitz. It's also a beast which fit the theme that I originally had in mind. I know there aren't a whole lot of beasts in this build, but there is a little bit of beast synergy, and the intent was I was just going to level Crowe in order to unlock some of the things that Crowe offers for beasts, as well as, get some packs here and there and try and get them. But we managed to hit Diamond before any of that happened. So Mastodon was a big piece of that, whether it's applying pressure, it's functioning as a removal. If you're watching this, you know the story by now. Next up is Feast or Famine, which is very important. Again, I talked about this in the Ogma list, but it does more than simply Pillar of Flame. Now, Pillar of Flame wouldn't be accessible here, at least not normally, but removing things with 5 health or less, or even healing your own in the scenario that you need to keep something alive, is very relevant. Or, and this, unfortunately, I didn't catch on recording. I played against the now infamous Ogma combo deck, and they played Flesh to Soil on one of my minions, obviously trying to set up the kill for the following turn. You can target your own minions with Famine. So you target the tree, you famine it, it loses 5 health, and then it just makes the combo much more complicated, because they're not going to play the Soul Striker to ambush it and then buff it and just get in for a gajillion. They're only going to be able to get the one attack unless they have some other way to set all this up. So Feast or Famine can dig you out of a ton of different spots, and the flexibility is super important. As mentioned before, Sickle Stalker, I don't think there's really much to be said. It's really good. Use it as removal, just like Mastodon. Use it to get in. It's just so flexible with Blitz. It's fantastic. Next up is Tomb Viper. Now, Tomb Viper is a card I just like because I love the art. I think it looks sweet. I really like when it's, I mean, you can kind of see it over there, like way over there. with the Random Thoughts logo. I love the idea of like bright green on black. I think it just looks sweet. So obviously I was drawn to this. But it's a beast, fit the theme. I also enjoy playing Undead, two tribes that I expect I'm going to be playing a lot in the future, but it's also a decent card. It has a decent stat distribution. Notably, it doesn't get one shot by Sickle Stalker. The opposing Stalker would need help. Additionally, it gets and fits into the idea of card advantage. A number of these cards, we've already seen the Owl draws you cards. The Swamp Scout draws cards via Conjure. Bloodscent Wolf even technically does it because it will end up giving you blood, which could get you a 1 for 0, sort of. It's weird when you're talking about the blood abilities, but you get where I'm going with it. Mastodon and Sickle Stalker can easily end up being X for 1s because you can set something up where your opponent has to, like, you immediately remove their thing, and then now they have another threat that they have to deal with. So they have to invest more cards. Your opponent has to commit more to the game that they might not want to right now. Tomb Viper serves a similar function where it's a sizable body. It might be able to block and live, eat something afterwards. It can present a decent threat. Like 3 isn't obviously anything to write home about, but it's respectable. And while the Suffer is random, you can set it up so that it happens where you want it for the most part. It usually will end up being a 50-50, but again, it could end up getting X for 1s, which is the whole sub-theme of this, maybe primary theme. Next up is Beast Mistress, which I actually really like. It's an Amazon warrior. Why does that matter? Again, Torque Warlord, just throwing that out there, because you conjure a random beast, and it gets +2/+2, which can make even things like Mastodon or Owl Familiar suddenly into threats, and then sometimes you'll hit the nuts and get Spirit Falcons or Abominations. I mean, that's not really hitting the nuts, but Abomination is now a 5/7 for 4. It's a sizable enemy. The aforementioned Torque Warlords, 7/7s with Blitz with this on the board. If that doesn't scare you if you're on the other side, I'm not sure what will. There are a number of things that you can hit, and again, the flexibility of Conjure and I guess the easiest way to put it is inherent card advantage of this, because your opponent has to deal with the body, and you're getting a card. So you didn't really spend a card because you're getting something back. There's always the fun part where every once in a while you get a Spirit Tiger and already have a board full of beasts and just go ham. Sometimes it happens. Next up, continuing the train of card advantage, is Nightmare. As you'd imagine, you want to try and set it up so that you're able to nuke something and get the demon. Do the demons really play in well synergy-wise? Obviously, not as much as a beast would, but you're not going to turn down the extra cards. Again, while I was saying it's a sub-theme, it's really primary theme of the deck to just have all of these card generation abilities. Plus, it allows you very much to feed into the idea of the tempo build and playing downhill. What do I mean by that? Well, if you can present threats early on and your opponent is constantly on the back foot, defending, parrying, desperately trying to stay alive, and then bang, you nightmare their thing, you have multiple threats on the board, pushing damage, and they go, well, I have to Arcane Overload, I have to Desert Twister, I have to play insert Board Sweeper. Okay, well, you just nightmared, and because you conjured a demon, you can build it either to play it that turn, because, you know, it's turn 9, turn 10, get a 4-drop, get a 5-drop, whatever, or you can just get a 10/10 demon and go, oh, you clear my board, I'll slam a 10/10 and conjure another demon. Or I'll play Blight, and, oh, look, your spells are now damaging you. I'll play a Freet, and then when it comes out, I'm going to curse you. Like, there's a number of different things that you can find that are spectacular. Of course, it's Conjure, so there's going to be limitations. You may not get anything super valuable, but you can probably make use of just about anything that's there. So, again, card advantage filling in. Next one up, along the same lines, is Oak Fist Lantern. Now, this got an indirect buff because Will-O-Wisp got buffed. So when this comes out, it's a 4/6 and a 4/4 flyer with Evade that come out due to the Warcry. This thing presents a great threat, and again, is fantastic post-board sweep. Your opponent Meteor Strikes, okay, they took up their entire turn. Slam Oak Fist Lantern, which creates 8 power worth of threats, and then a Tomb Viper, or a Sickle Stalker, or even a Bloodscent Wolf, doesn't matter, because now, I mean, it matters, but now you're presenting 10 power on the board, one of which is evasive, and they're all relatively sizable on the back end. It seems pretty dangerous, and I really like this guy, and I expect that it'll show up in other places Chat had advised me to use this even before the buff. Admittedly, I didn't run this deck until after the buff, but it's been working out pretty well. I was never really unhappy to see Oakfist Lantern. Now, next up is the Singleton Trophy Hunter. There are a number of things that I would have preferred to include in this slot and some of the other slots, but it, again, feeds into the card advantage element. We're advancing a threat plus removing theirs, and it's a clean way to remove big things. If you notice, our removal is primarily damage-based. Feast or Famine is 5. Nightmare, 5. Deadly Snipe, 5. You noticing a pattern here? Desert Twister, at least that one's 4. It breaks the pattern, although it's in the wrong direction. But whatever, you get the idea. Point is that you have all this damage-based removal, and if they play something with, like, even 11 health, it could be super challenging to remove it for very obvious reasons. Now, I say only 11 health, that's obviously a lot, but you get the idea that if you can't singularly remove it, it could be a serious issue. And sometimes you're forced into weird scenarios where you have to nightmare something pre-combat in order to make it go away. Trophy Hunter solves a lot of those issues, so you will want to find it in specific matchups. Desert Twister feels like a prerequisite. If you're playing nature, it's just really strong. I don't know that there really needs to be much said about it. I think it's all fairly obvious, but just to state the obvious, you can clear a path, you can double it up with other removal, you can even just buy time by stunning their flying units. It's a lot of stuff. A lot of positive things about Twister. Now, closing out, we're going to have 2 legendaries. Gaia's Blessing was just kind of a thing. I just threw it in there for the hell of it. It did actually win me a few games due to the life gain, as well as, again, drawing cards. Even though it's not really drawing cards, it's not Conjure, it's just 3 random nature cards. So you could hit hot garbage, or you could hit the absolute nuts. And it could be different depending on the scenario. If you need the life gain, maybe you don't care if those 10 cost cards are unplayable. Maybe it's just a matter of, I need to gain 30 life. Or maybe you just want things to play right now, so you need the low-end stuff. You don't care about the healing. In general, you'll just, get a mix, a smattering of different things. But it worked out okay. It can be very clunky. It basically takes up the whole turn. You don't have a whole lot of 3 drops and lower. There are some, but odds are they were expended prior to that, either as removal, as face damage, as setting things up, trying to draw cards, etc. But it can be valuable. It's okay. You could look at replacing it if you don't have it or don't want to run it. Now, the last one up is Trample Herd. This one's that we've talked about as well. It's actually very, very strong. I, again, cannot understate it. It's another card that helps dig you out of holes. Oh, your opponent just Arcane Overloaded the second time. Guess what? Trample Herd. Get in there. There are certain points where you just want to be looking at it when your opponent's hitting the 40s, hitting the 30s, that you want to say, okay, do I have 4 lanes open at least? Trample Herd time. And just see, because you're pushing on that turn, assuming, let's say the board is clear. You're pushing 10 just from the Mastodons and then another 4 from your champion for 14. That's a lot of damage. As I said, if they're at the low 40s, if they're in the 30s, that could be half their life total right there. Give or take a few points. You get the idea. Your opponent is immediately under a lot of pressure to either wipe the board or do something drastic to either end the game or stabilize. And that's not always easy. Additionally, if your opponent did something wacky and they dealt with your previous board by contesting with other minions, maybe there was some minion fights, and I oddly enough had a few games like that where I was able to play I was going to say Mastodon Herd, which it is, I guess, but a Trample Herd to smash previously damaged enemies and then finish them off while also pushing some face damage. So there's a lot of flexibility here. Also, it's just a matter of, okay, do you feel like you can get there? And sometimes it's an art form, not a science, as opposed to a tried and true set of rules and decision trees. Sometimes you just know, like, my opponent doesn't have it. I'm going for it. And you just go for it. Sometimes they'll have it, so you got to be careful. But keep in mind, there are times where you do just want to close the game out and not give them a chance to get back in the game. So that's all the cards from the deck. Let's talk a little bit about the overall plan, and then we'll jump into some games. So what's the overall game plan for this? I mentioned a little bit earlier, but basically you're playing a mid-rangey, tempo-ish deck, and then just relying on card advantage from the various factors in the build to try and carry you from early game to mid-game, and ideally only mid-late game if you can help it. or late mid-game. It's a weird phrase, whatever you want to look at it as. But you don't want to try and fight the top high-end decks. There are a lot of decks that can do a lot of unfair things, whether it's the Ogma combo deck, it's Sakara builds, it's insert whatever. There's a variety of things that will end up happening to you that are really mean if you allow your opponent the time to do so. So, what do you want to do? Generally, well, mulligan away your high-end stuff. Kind of a no-brainer there. You're not going to be playing Trample Herd until turn 8. Why are you keeping it in your opening hand? It's a fantastic top deck, but you don't need to hold on to it from the word go. Instead, you want to find your Alpha Familiars, you want to find your Swamp Scouts, you want to find your early removal so that you can try, and by removal, I specifically mean the Mastodon Sickle Stalkers, any of your early plays so that you're presenting a threat early on. You want to pressure because the longer you allow your opponent to live, the better the chances that they're going to do something mean. And we don't like mean things being done to us. We want to win the game. So try and close the game out. You're not an aggro deck. You're not playing the old Ogma deck. Well, not the old Ogma deck, but the Ogma deck that I talked about previously. You're not necessarily going to just blow somebody out and just smash their face in. Maybe you can run them over pretty quickly, but a lot of your cards here are just, we'll say, control elements. Again, you're a control deck against aggressive things, but you are most certainly the aggro deck against control, and that's the thing to keep in mind. So where possible, push damage, try and take efficient trades, look for card advantage elements, and don't be afraid to play your minions into open lanes and not block. You have blitz, you have out-of-hand removal, you have a whole lot of card advantage. Utilize it. Try and push damage where you can, end the game before your opponent ends it in their favor. So that covers the deck, the champion, as well as all the cards. If you have any questions, feel free to jump in the comments below, or check out one of my streams, or hit me up on Discord, or on Twitter, whatever's easiest for you. I'd love to hear feedback about either this deck, this video, or other stuff. We're going to jump into some games that I played from Sapphire on my way to Diamond. But as always, everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And Black Lives Matter.